On the front side of this apparatus, we have our runoff jars. As you can see, as the rain will come down, it will accumulate, and if the soil can't take that water in, it will run off, and it will run off directly into these jars instead of on the ground. And then in the back you can see we've got another set of jars. Those are the infiltration jars. This is no-till corn and beans, and right now it has wheat planted in it, which I kind of smashed a little bit, but you can see there's a few sprigs coming up out of this wheat pan. So the drill line's running right down through here. So it's new no-till. This is native rangeland, as you can see. There is some encroachment. We've got some cool season grass that's growing in here, so it's not 100% warm season grass, but it was little blue stem. We've got a forb over here that really wants to live. So the middle pan is a traditional wheat sorghum till fallow. So, and they use anhydrous, and it gets tilled to oblivion. This was a cover crop right before we collected it that was grazed, and he's in a D4 drought. So this is no-till.
This is a Hastings silt loam soil from Giltner, Nebraska. Basically the history the last 3 years has been vertical tillage. He hasn't done full tillage, but he likes the vertical till to allow him to get a good seed bed to plant his different crops. He's had, on this particular field here, he's had field peas and popcorn in a rotation.
All right, so right away in that till pan, you can see on that white backsplash, those little individual sand, silt, and clay particles. Remember this slake jar? Now we've got the force of a raindrop coming down at about 20 miles an hour. This is as closely replicated to natural rainfall as possible at a 6 psi. And as it's coming down, it's hitting that surface and then exploding. And you can also see that on our rangeland, we don't have anything at all in that runoff jar, nor in just a little dab on the no-till. Michael's is running off a little bit because D4 drought, that's pretty severe. For as long, I think he's had, 400 days of less than an inch of rainfall, cumulative rainfall. And then the PrairieFood pan is getting simulated rain, kind of like what we're doing right here, so it's doing pretty decent. When we add a carbon amendment like that to the soil, you know, when we talk about the principles and how we want to have everything as close to native rangeland as we can, you know, that mimics native range. It has living roots throughout the year. It has cover all of the time. It has good diversity, and it also has minimal disturbance or optimal disturbance in the case of rangeland. We want to go in there and we want to, you know, graze that at appropriate times and give it that disturbance, unlike CRP. I've done CRP on here and it runs right off because it's not getting that disturbance that it needs. I've also had hayland on here, also runs off, taking too much carbon off. We're going to take the PrairieFoods out because it did do a really good job. Look, there's just an inkling in here of water and it looks good enough to drink. I mean, it's pretty clean, pretty nice. Even though he's doing that tillage, when we talk about a disturbance, it's that intensity, frequency, and duration. Yeah, he's running the rototiller out there. I call it a rototiller because that's what a turbo tool is. And when I cut this pan, I was a little dismayed to see just below it, if he would go to no-till, he had some fabulous dark black subangular blocky soil down there that was just waiting to become an aggregate. And this on the top is pretty weak aggregation, but by adding that soil carbon amendment there, it kind of offsets some of that tillage. It can help it a little bit, alleviate some of that, because you're adding back some of that that carbon that we lost. So, you know, there's a little bit of sediment in there, but not much. You can see it on the bottom. It's not too bad. You can see our till pan. We got some major movement. If you look, before we dump them, I'll show you up and close. When we think about, you know, putting terraces out on the landscape, we've only got about 24 inches of space here. And we had about an inch of rainfall. And look at that soil movement, because this was pretty level all the way across. This is now level with the edge of this pan. So we had movement from the back of the pan to the front of the pan after just an inch of rainfall. So imagine, if you will, having this across the landscape and having to do that terrace maintenance all the time. Okay, so you can see from an infiltration standpoint, not much went into that till jug. Our rangeland, we got just a little bit, a sprinkle, not much. But from infiltration wise, look at that native range and what it does. It's pretty fantastic, and why we want to try to mimic, you know, this when we are doing these principles. When I was talking about the principles of keeping the soil covered. We've had almost 1.5 inches of rainfall on this tilled soil, and everybody says we got to fluff the soil up so we can get the water in, right? Did it work? Not always. And here's our PrairieFoods, pretty wet, pretty moist, that we cut. Like I said, I'd like to see him do no-till, because he did have just a little bit of slickness here, but just below that. We got some really cool, if you want to come up and look, some root hairs growing on that just shot out while it was in my garage. So that was pretty neat. We know that these different managements and following the principles does allow for biological diversity above ground from doing the principles and below ground from a biological standpoint.